afterwards. If you don't want to be in the recording, it's fairly simple. You just don't feel you have to sort of take the floor and take the mic. Please do still post in the chat. That's another way to share ideas, and I will introduce another one in just a moment. So with that first bit of business done, the next thing I want to do is introduce myself. My name is John Alexander. I am a Lib Dem member and volunteer and a resident of Sevenoaks since 2019. I feel like I timed my move out of a one-bedroom flat in London extraordinarily well. And really loving living in Sevenoaks. I work broadly in participatory democracy and really am passionate about doing these kinds of events and having these kinds of conversations, and have found a good bunch of friends in the local Lib Dems who want to do the same. This is a bit of an experimental event. It's the second time we've done something like this in a much bigger group than we had first time out. So bear with us and know that we're coming from the best possible place and trying to do it right. But we're not perfect. We are just volunteers. So bear with us if there are a few clunks along the process. I want to say a quick word about what we're here to talk about tonight, and maybe post one or two links. The first thing to say is that this is a conversation about arguably the most important conversation we could be having about the climate emergency, about what we can do about climate change. And I want to emphasize that what the conversation tonight is about what we can do as a community. It's a little about what we can do politically and what the Liberal Democrats can do and how we can support the community. But it's also about how we as a community, as members of the community, what we can actually do ourselves. And there is a huge amount of influence and power we can have locally between ourselves as a community and the councils. And just to make that point, I've just posted a quick link in the chat, and there'll be more links going into the chat, and the chat also will be downloaded and recorded and shared. But the link I've just posted is to the Committee on Climate Change's recent report, their 6th carbon budget. And one of the things they say in there, in an additional report about local authorities, is that 1/3 of emissions in the UK are either under the control of or under the influence of local authorities. So really 1/3 of emissions is what we can hope to actually have a say in this kind of conversation. It's a really big and important one. The next thing I want to say is that this, to really emphasize that this is about what we can do together, and both in terms of influencing local government, but also in terms of doing stuff ourselves as a community. This isn't about this isn't an event that's about kind of what is the big new technology that's going to save us all or anything like that. This is about how can we organize, what can we do together. And to that end, I wanted to just post another link in the chat, which is to our all our ideas page, and where we are gathering the ideas that come up tonight, ideas that have come up before. And I'd encourage you to have a look at that if you get a chance. I'll come to it and we'll share it again after the event and talk you through it just to close the event tonight. But look at that beforehand. There's already some really wonderful ideas from creating a community energy company that we'll hear more about later this evening, I'm sure. And the final thing just for me to say, just to before I say a bit more, and then I'll say a word about the ground rules for this evening and get into introducing our opening contributors and making the event happen. The final thing just on the substance is to say we're not doing this because we're Lib Dems and we want the credit for it. I mean, there are members of the Green Party. There's a candidate of the Green Party here with us this evening that we're going to talk, that we'll introduce at some point. There's members of the Women's Equality Party, there's members of the Labour Party, and so this isn't really about us. This is about, although there are relatively few Conservatives, I think, unfortunately. But we're not doing this because we're Lib Dems. We're Lib Dems because we're doing this. This is the way we want to do politics, is to hold these kinds of conversations and tap into ideas and do it together. So, in terms of ground rules, just another minute on that. There's 3 ground rules for this evening. The first is no questions. And what we mean by that is we're looking for your ideas. We're looking for ideas and references, like where could we take inspiration from? What could we do as a community? And what do you want to do that we could help you, that others in this room could help you with? Rather than our speakers kind of giving forth knowledge and you challenging that knowledge, it's about sharing ideas. To that end, before we go any further, I want to check the function works by which we're going to bring you into the conversation. So if you can open the participants box in your, if you can go to the bottom of your screen and open participants, and then you should see on the right hand side of your screen, there's an opportunity to raise your hand. So everyone who's here to discuss climate change and what Sevenoaks can do about it, please raise your hand. We'll do a test. Look at those hands going up. Everyone's got this down, I think. Do try and find that functionality if you can in the participants box. Raise your hand. Give people another minute or two to do so. So, and what we'll do is I'll note people whose hands are raised, and that'll be a key way for me to bring them in. I also have my good friend Kyle Marsh. He will be, oh, Claire Shea is just pointing out in the chat, but it might be under reactions on some platforms. There are different versions of Zoom technology, so hopefully you can find that. We do have a backup plan, as I say, which is Kyle Marsh, who will be monitoring the chat and is waving now if you can see your gallery view. We'll be watching for you doing exactly that sort of motion, drawing attention to yourself, and he'll make sure that I can see you and spot you. So if you can take your hands down now, if you've raised them, so that those hands don't distract us. And John, if I can ask you to pass the hosting to me, that would be wonderful.
I'll just find you. Oh.
And then the final, and then so that's the first ground rule, no questions, and so do share your ideas. Second ground rule we call pass the microphone. So this is all about, we're not going to hear everyone in this time. There's already been some amazing ideas shared and some questions asked on email. So what I'd ask is that keep yourself brief when you come in, make your points, share your ideas, and then let's make the space for as many of those as possible to be heard. And the final ground rule, the third ground rule, is say where you're coming from. And this isn't, I mean, Sevenoaks, the obvious answer for almost all of us, I think. But what I mean by that is there are some amazing people in the room, and it's just lovely to know what experience you're speaking from. And that doesn't necessarily mean some people in the room do have some illustrious professional backgrounds, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. It might mean you're speaking from personal experiences in some capacity, some very personal capacity, and that's equally as valid, but it's just really good to know where these voices are coming from. So so that's the introduction. Hopefully that all makes sense. Ground rules, no questions, pass the mic, say where you're coming from, spirit of the evening, let's share as many ideas as we can. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first opening speaker, our first bit of inspiration. And this is a good friend of mine, a man called Rob Hopkins, who has had a serious track record in this space of community action on climate. Rob founded the whole Transition Towns movement out of initially an experiment as a teacher in Kinsale in Ireland. And he's gone on to write several books, the most recent of which is the beautifully written From What Is to What If. I've just posted the link to that in chat as well, and do call up Fleur at Sevenoaks Bookshop and get your order in for that. And you can find out more about Rob on the links as well. But what I wanted to share to finish my introduction to Rob was a wonderful quote that he's sort of become semi-famous for, which he said, "If we wait for governments, it'll be too little too late. If we act as individuals, it'll be too little. But if we act as communities, it might be just enough, just in time." So if I can invite Rob to take the floor and give us your take on what might be possible for a community like Sevenoaks to do in the world.
Cool. Okay. Good evening, everybody. I need to be made a co-host so that I can share some pictures with you all, if that might be possible, John.
Do you mind raising your hand briefly, Rob, so I can find you? I'm having a little difficulty there. Where are you? You there?
Are we on? No, I still can't do it.
Done.
No, no. Oh, I'm a host. Okay, so hang on, I can go.
Sorry about that.
Good. Okay. So good evening, everybody. Hello, I'm Rob Hopkins. I'm speaking to you from deepest, darkest Devon, and I've got 5 minutes. So this is going to be quite high energy. So yes, I'm involved with the transition movement, which has for a long time been about what we can do where we are, with what we have, with the resources that we have and the people that we have. And those can be projects that are relatively small, like, for example, planting some trees, starting a food garden, to more ambitious things like a community energy company, to something like some of the really ambitious things that I'm going to go on to talk about. The point is that it's what we can do here now without waiting for anyone's permission. And I want to focus a bit, as John, the last book I wrote was about imagination. And I just want to touch on that because I think it's a really important part of this. One of my favorite definitions of imagination is that it is the ability to see things as if they could be otherwise, which feels like absolutely the superpower that we need to be cultivating nowadays. Is the Ministry of Defense sitting around actively imagining a world, a peaceful world, and how to get there? Is the Department of Justice sitting around and actively imagining a world with no prisons and a world with restorative justice? You cannot build what you cannot imagine, and we have to be able to imagine it first. This is one of my sheroes, Walida Imarisha, who said, whenever we try to envision a world without war, without violence, without prisons, without capitalism, we are engaging in speculative fiction. All organizing is science fiction. So much. All organizing is science fiction. Once the imagination is unshackled, liberation is limitless. But the problem we have in 2021 is that our collective imagination, a muscle which should be like this, is actually like this, because we've managed to create the perfect storm of conditions that are injurious to the imagination. We know that anxiety, loneliness, trauma, stress, lack of contact to nature, too much time in front of screens, damaging to the imagination. The imagination needs space, and we have less and less and less time for that. So we're facing a problem, a challenge in the climate emergency that demands us to be at our most imaginative at the same time as we've created a society and economy that is profoundly ruinous to that imagination. So how do we turn that around? For me, one of the ways is that this is about longing. How do we in 2021 cultivate a deep longing for a low carbon world? It's the only way we're going to create it. If we were going to do that with facts and figures and rational arguments, we'd have done this in the 80s. This is about imagination. It's about storytelling. We can use the work of people like this, James Mackay at the University of Leeds, who draws the future. He says, we're going to be taking cars out of our cities because we have to. That frees up a lot of space. What are we going to do in that space? Maybe we turn that space into gardens and food, and our kids walk to school through gardens rather than past traffic jams. I think there's a lot where the world around us feels so permanent and feels so stuck. And how do we help people to imagine beyond that? This is the London National Park City, who I love, and a little animation they made. This is Fleet Street. You go to I'm sure you've all been to Fleet Street, maybe even recently. It looks like this. It'll always look like this. Will it? Or maybe it could look like this. When we allow ourselves to see spaces in a different way and see possibilities, I think it really, really helps us to shift the limits that we impose on what's possible. And this isn't just some sort of thing that Rob Hopkins cobbled up over tea. This is actually something that's happening in the world. In Barcelona, the municipality recently announced they were going to close a third of all the streets in the center of Barcelona and turn those streets into forests, into places for people to play, for community. This is the future. You know, this is something that the most progressive cities in the world now are taking big, bold steps. Naomi Klein says there are no non-radical solutions left. The time for little incremental steps is completely over and behind us. And the climate and ecological emergency demands us to be really bold. And part of the privilege I have in the work I do in the transition movement is visiting things like this. This is in a town called Montsartou, about half an hour inland from Nice. I went there a couple of years ago. There, the municipality bought this land on the edge of the town and used it to create a market garden where they grow 70% of all the food for the schools in the town. And what they found was it led to all kinds of interesting behavior change in the parents, in the kids, in the whole community, because they did that. It was one of those climate solutions that's a win-win, 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 win-win-win scenario for biodiversity, mental health, public health, local economy, etc., etc. And so many of the solutions that we could do now really are like that. One of my favorites that's come through the transition movement is in the city of Liège, whereabouts in Belgium. About 6 years ago, the transition group came up with a really good what if question. I'll talk more about what if questions shortly. They said, what if in a generation's time, the majority of food eaten in Liège came from the land closest to Liège? And it's such a beautiful question, because just asking the question gives you a taste of what that might be like. It gets you thinking differently. I went there 6 years ago. They did a big event. They invited everybody who cared about food in the city. I then went back about 4 years later. In that time in Liège, they made 25 new cooperatives. They raised 5 million euros of investment from local people. They started a shop. They now run 4 shops in the center of the city. It's now how the municipality is distributing the land that it runs around the city. They're now redesigning how the hospitals, the universities, the schools feed themselves. I met the mayor of the city who said, we used to say we want to be a smart city. Now we want to be a transition city. And it started with asking a really great what if question. And what if questions are really powerful. I did a talk recently for Transition Bude in Cornwall. And in the month before the talk, every day they posted a different what if question. They started out kind of, as you might imagine, what if local renewable energy reduced my bills? What if the bird song drowned out the traffic? I liked, what if car parks became play parks? And so on. And by the end, the last two I loved. One of them was, what if there was a daily imagination lesson? Yeah, what if there was? And by the end, the last one, they didn't even have to put all the words what if, because people had got the idea. But actually what they were speaking to was about community and conviviality and connection and getting beyond what's immediately in front of us into a future that we feel really connected to. In Sweden, the Green Party recently ran an advertising campaign where they just put the words what if over photos. You know, what if we lived in a world where a father could take his kids for a walk in the woods all day and not be worried that he wasn't being busy enough? What if everybody was involved in growing food and that was part of our cityscape? So just the last couple of bits I want to share with you in my last minute or so is, this is in Camden in London, where Camden Council were the first council in London to declare a climate emergency. They were the first ones to do a citizens assembly on climate, and then they opened this shop together with Transition Kentish Town and a couple of other local XR groups, Friends of the Earth groups. They called it Think and Do, and it was a community imagining space. It was a community what if space that was just held and facilitated so people could come in and explore those questions. It was really beautiful, and for the 8 weeks it was open, there were all different groups and organizations coming through, and at the end they gathered all these stories up that people had shared, and they created a newspaper. Their local newspapers called the Camden New Journal. They called it the Camden Future Journal. They made a big one. They also made a wraparound. Every edition of the newspaper that went out in Camden had this wraparound of stories from the future. As the poet Rilke once said, the future must enter into you a long time before it happens, which is so beautiful. I'm going to say it again. The future must enter into you a long time before it happens. So how do we find the opportunities to really do that and bring that alive for people? And I think I've run out of time to tell that story. So I'm just going to say, if you want to find out anything else about what I do, there's a blog there, there's Transition Network, there's loads of resources. If doing transition in Sevenoaks is something that's of interest, you'll find all kinds of resources on there, including the Essential Guide to Doing Transition, which is a really distilled guide to how to do it. And I do a podcast called From What If to What Next.
Superb. Thank you so much, Rob. Can I ask you to do the, we're on a slightly limited Zoom account. If you could hand back the hosting to me, would you be able to make me host?
I might.
And we're going to, as you do that, thank you so much for that. You're probably not able to stay with us for too long, but if you can, then that would be wonderful. You're very welcome, and we will be tapping into your wisdom along the way on our journey. But folks, I love that framing of the what if questions, and please do sort of chip in your own what if questions in the chat. Share what resonated with you. We love to see that as we continue the conversation on. Our second opening contributor is Elizabeth Purvis, who's a district councillor in Sevenoaks, a Liberal Democrat district councillor, and she's going to just give us a bit of a sense of where the district council is on climate at the moment, and where we're starting from that perspective. I should say before she starts that the district council isn't the only local authority. There's also, of course, the Kent County Council, which we'll say more about later, and there's local town and parish councils across the district. But let's start. But this is a district-wide event. We're talking about what we can do as a district. So we're going to start with Elizabeth and Sevenoaks District Council. Elizabeth, over to you.
Thank you. There's so much, Rob, that is so inspirational what we could do. Not just tell you what we're doing at the district council level, which is so small compared to the ideas you've got and the ideas you've been working in doing. So the district council, it's committed to working towards achieving net zero emissions by 2030 on council assets and services. So I talk about what they're doing and what they hope to do and what they're talking about doing. So one idea they've got is reducing energy in the offices. So you can have smart lighting. So when you walk out of an area, the lighting goes off automatically. You're not wasting lights all the time. You can turn your computer off when you leave at the office, not just leave it on. You can move to renewable energy supplier, which they're doing. you can replace inefficient heating like the old boilers and reduce water. And the District Council Argyll offices, they have got waterless urinals. Now, I've never inspected them. I'm sorry, I've no idea what they're like, but I'm told that they work. So maybe Tony's been them, I don't know. But anyway, waterless urinals is an idea. The District Council has got a web page for climate change, but to be honest, it's very disappointing. They could do so much more with that. And I think after listening to Rob, we could really think more about how we could make that more exciting, more user-friendly, not just straight loads of text. If I talk about recycling, which I'm sure you all know to a certain extent, or you probably all know, you've got the weekly rubbish collection, that's fine. And that's used as fuel to generate electricity. And less than 2% of the rubbish goes to landfill, which I think is a fair thing. You've got paper and plastics, which is a weekly collection. You've got the garden waste recycling, which is a paid for service. You've got bottle banks, but should that be really curbside collection? Is there any point in driving to a bottle bank, using your car to drive to a bottle bank? Would it be better on a curbside collection? I'll leave that with you. Not recycled is food waste, the little green caddies, which I know that they do in Gravesham, because I talked to John Diath about it and other people, which I've suggested to them, but it's gone nowhere at the moment. But I'll keep hassling for that because I think you can make so much out of a little bit of food waste. You can make renewable energy, which would be great, or compost. You've also got the big problem, which Tony's been working on, coffee cups, which people buy their takeaway coffees and they just stick their coffee cups in the rubbish dump. And so it all piles up. And that's a hell of a waste. And Tony's attempting to work on that, Tony Clayton. If we talk about the council's vehicle fleet, there's a move away from diesel and petrol and all to be replaced by either electric or hydrogen vehicles by 2030. That will include dustbin freighters. 2 years ago, they bought 2 huge dustbin freighters, which were diesel. That's absolutely ludicrous. They're gouging out emissions as they stop and start and stop and start. And I've been trying very hard to persuade them that they should not buy any more diesel dustbin freighters. They should get hybrid ones. And I think that's probably accepted. But certainly the move away from no more petrol cars, petrol vans. Let's keep going. Hang on.
Elizabeth, is it fair to say that the most of the focus is on the council's sort of own operations and what they can do more than on the what we as a whole community are doing?
I think so, yes. Yeah, I'll keep going and you can decide at the end. So we've got electric charging points. There's a rollout programme for electric charging points in all car parks. As of October 2020, there's only 10, not a great number, to be honest. Then you've got the problem of charging points, electrical charging points for roads without off-street parking, which is around here, Hartson's area, Serpentine. A lot of places, Victoria Road, have got no off-street parking. So where do they have their charging points for electric vehicles? I've looked into, well, there's an idea of having trenches. It's a possibility of having charging points that way. You've also got, what is good, I think, is residents' off-road parking permits are free for electric or hybrid vehicles. So that's encouraging you to get an electric or hybrid vehicle, so you don't have to pay for your residents' parking permit. I keep going. In the planning field, new developments must include electric charging points. However, for the Tesco development, 104 flats, how many electrical charging points? 3, big deal. How do you work that one out? So I think they must have more than that. It should be at least a third, if not more. So we should pressurise for that. Most places now have cycle racks, new developments, and also passive houses, which use little energy for heating and cooling, and they're low environmental impact. There's a reduction in council tax for them. They're going to try and encourage people to use more efficient energy houses and so pay less council tax. Generally, wildflowers on verges and open spaces is less mowing, so I think that's being introduced. In Hollybush, there's the meadow, and that's going down to the Seal Hollow Road, and that's now just being left. It's not being cut particularly, it's being left to wildflowers. There's a talk about free trees for every new house, plus more trees, but I don't know where these trees are, take their word for it. Another great idea is pocket forests, about the size of a tennis court, just a little pocket forest. But where are they? There's just all talk, but there's no pocket forests yet to my knowledge. So I think we should keep pushing for that. And finally, the District Council developing a tree strategy. Well, they love strategies, so they're developing a tree strategy. So we're going to partnership working with local businesses. Again, the council love partnership working. I'm not quite sure what it achieves sometimes, but they like doing that. Sevenoaks Wildlife Week, how to engage with nature, working with the Countryside Partnership. And with schools, walk or cycle to school day. I think you should do that frequently, not just once a year. You could do that once a month to encourage children to walk or cycle. Do it once and may do it again. Then finally, sustainable transport. So to reduce the need for travel. So the District Council want to develop an electric vehicle car club, and also they've got a west-east cycle route linking schools for safe cycling and walking routes. So this is just a roundup of the things that they're doing. They could do a lot more, but at least they're doing something. So I think it's more encouraging than it was maybe a year ago. So I'll stop there. All right.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. And I think that the spirit that it sounds like I'm getting from that is there's a will to an extent, but there's not really a kind of an energy, a drive that it feels like. And I think you guys feel like you're trying to do your best. Would anyone like to come in and sort of suggest something? I mean, there's all sorts of ideas flowing in the chat. Martin Day's talking about wild. Martin, would you be prepared to come in and say a word about wild in Sevenoaks? Could I ask you to unmute yourself and just chip in and your thoughts on this and what we could do here? Is Martin Day there?
Yeah, I am. Thank you. Sorry, I was struggling to unmute myself. Yeah, I'll own up. I launched it. It's small scale. You know, it's only about 70 of us who've sort of followed the Facebook pages. But the idea is that, you know, our gardens are an enormous resource for tackling climate change, for supporting our wildlife, which, as we all know, is in dreadful decline. And if we all take 1, 2, 3 steps, you know, be it not mowing our lawn, there's no May coming up, planting pollinator-friendly plants, putting a pond in, you know, a lot of these things cost nothing. Not mowing your lawn every May saves you money. It saves you time. You know, other things, putting in a pond might cost you a little bit. So for everyone, there is different things that you can do. If you've got a large garden, you can do a lot. If you've got a patio or if you've only got a window, you can still plant, you know, plants that are pollinator friendly. So the Facebook page is there to try and encourage people to share ideas, get enthusiastic. We've got little blue hearts that you can put in your front garden to show that you're up for it. So that's what I'm trying to do to try and make a little bit of a difference. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Martin. That's lovely. Really great. I think you'll get some more blue hearts popping up around Sevenoaks and a few more wild in Sevenoaks tags. So we'll see what we can do with that one. But and lovely ideas for what more we could do as well. I'm going to come now to, and folks, do raise your hand if you've got something you'd like to contribute. If you want to get on screen and start sharing. I'm going to come now to a close friend of Sevenoaks, a lady called Tara Copeland, who I know has got lots of ideas and is actually chair of an organisation called the Young Liberals. So Tara, do you want to chip in? What are you making of the conversation so far? What do you think we could be doing more of? Over to you.
Yeah, so thanks so much for inviting me to this. It's really exciting to see so many interesting ideas being thrown around, and the speakers who've already spoken, like really brilliant stuff that's going on and being talked about. I thought I'll just give you a really quick background to sort of, so I'm chair of Young Liberals. I'm originally from Canada, actually. I'm from Vancouver. And so a lot of my experience with the environment and that sort of thing started from a very young age. I was very lucky in Canada. When you think wildlife and nature, it literally is right on your doorstep. And a lot of people think like the wildlife that we encounter is really exciting, like bears and cougars and coyotes and eagles and all these magnificent creatures. And it is a really great way to get young children and people interested in wildlife, because these are these sort of big, wonderful animals and that sort of thing. But it's also really important to the smaller animals. And I think especially in the United Kingdom, all those little creatures are so fascinating and so interesting. And building up awareness and education around that, starting from a young age, but also going up into even older ages, is really, really important. And it helps people begin to sort of care about the environment. And so what I'm sort of talking about there is that kind of basic level interaction and education about your local environment. And so this can be done in really brilliant ways through community projects. I think some of my best memories growing up are from working in community gardens and that sort of thing through community centers, or doing, you know, these little wildlife education programs and that sort of thing, again, through community centers, not necessarily through schools. By these locally run projects and that kind of thing, talking about the local wildlife, the stuff that you can find in your backyard, how it all links together into the ecosystem and why it's all important. And those inspire, obviously, young children to sort of think about the environment in a wider perspective. But I absolutely really do believe that you're never too old to grow a love for the environment and learn more about it. And so, you know, extending out these community gardens and that sort of thing, having these sort of, you know, whether it's an allotment or a public space, they're really great. Even, you know, I think a lot of people are sort of talking about the small disused spaces that you can use to grow vegetables and that kind of thing. Getting young people involved, getting older people involved, all working together can really foster a sense of community. As well, we were sort of talking a little bit about what to do with recycling and garbage and food waste and that kind of thing. And so what I always thought was really interesting, something that we do back home, is we incentivize recycling. So as a way to kind of encourage people to return things. So, and we're not talking to just big, massive return depots. You could take your local recycling to a grocery store, and basically you would receive about 10 cents, 5 cents, depending on the size of the bottle or juice box, carton, or whatever bag, to sort of encourage people to get into the habit of picking these things out of their garbage. As well, just, you know, the simple things, making recycling easy for people. One of the things that we did at Edinburgh with the student population is actually advertise what you can and can't recycle depending on where you live, because it does differ, especially for new people moving into local areas. You might have been able to recycle one thing in say London, but you can't recycle it, say, in Sevenoaks, or the other way around. And just making sure that you're having that public awareness about, you know, what you can and can't recycle, so that you don't end up with contaminated garbage or recycling. And like I said, making it easy, you know, having those drink container recycling pockets with your garbage bins on local street, kind of thing, all really, really helps. Because I honestly do believe that sort of the key to kind of making environmental impact is to make people care about the environment. So inspiring that love of nature and inspiring that love of your natural environment and what's around you, and making it easy, making it as simple as possible for people to make the environmentally friendly choice. So yeah, there's lots of little things like that. Again, one of the things that I was so happy to hear Elizabeth talking about was that sort of the, you know, the wildflowers for the verges and that sort of thing. I think somebody put in the chat doing it for all of them. I think that's great. That's a great way, again, to sort of think about those smaller species, and also, you know, make the sides of streets more pretty. Flowers are really, really lovely compared to grass. So it's just these little actions that you can get involved with in the community, and making sure that you're bringing everybody along with you.
Thank you so much, Tara, and like that, the endorsement for Martin Day's approach. I'm just going to share. You make me want to share a thing from a past life of mine. I was involved in the making of a film called Project Wild Thing that was about reconnecting children and nature, a comedy actually, in which the concept is that the man makes himself marketing director for nature for his children. We got a decent review in a couple of newspapers. I'm going to come next. I think to I think we might just see if Dale Bentley, who I think is one of the owners of Otto's on the high street, is in the meeting. Dale, are you there?
I don't think Dale's here, but Jack's here.
Oh, we've got a Jack. Jack, could you tell us a bit more about what you guys have been up to, and also what you think could happen, what more could happen from here?
Yeah, for sure. So we have a small little coffee shop in Sevenoaks called Otto's. And we've been recently sort of declared our own little war on waste, and we've become, because of the pandemic, we've become, you know, as everyone I'm sure on the call is aware of, the amount of the problem that we've got with waste, and we feel guilty of that as anyone due to the coffee cup. So we've actually stopped using coffee cups as of the 8th of May. And we actually, like I can't remember, sorry, the name of the lady that just spoke, but I think the point about recycling collection points is fantastic, because we want to actually become one of those points as a matter of urgency, because I think it really brings to the forefront, gets people into great habits. The awareness starts the conversation. We've stopped using single-use cups. So obviously it's a massive risk for us and our business, and we're expecting a big decline in sales because of that. But we're not willing, as the individuals within the business, we're not willing to sort of make a profit anymore by putting that stuff out into the environment. And we're hoping by doing that, we can demonstrate a sustainable business model to other local businesses that shows that, we don't have to operate that way. I think we're sort of trying to not stop the problem at the source, as it were, but I think the idea that if we can, any business, I recently learned that there's actually a Starbucks opening in the town, and it worries me deeply that we're doing what we are, but we're only a very small business in a very varied field. And I think that we need to have some sort of qualification process, because we've done what we've done off our own back, but I think businesses should be we're sending out this stuff into the environment. We shouldn't be allowed to do that, and there should be some sort of council or forum where businesses should be rewarded if they're not sending that stuff out, because if we're not producing the waste, then we don't have to worry about processing it, we don't have to worry about recycling it. And I think that if we can think a little bit deeper into stopping the problem before it comes out and rewarding businesses for that, then that's a great place to start.
Thanks so much, Jack. I think you're making me think of there are examples, I think, around the world of things like plastic-free towns. Like I think there's a place with Raglan in New Zealand, and someone was telling me there's a kind of Bahamas thing going on as well. So some really interesting ones. I'm going to come next and move around. There's so much here. I feel like the first one of these we did on the town centre and what we can do to bring our town centre back to life. And there was huge amounts of energy, but it was a little more focused, and I'm feeling like there's so much, so many places we could go. But I really want to come to Sarah Newman, who has been posting in the chat about a community energy project in Shoreham. Is that right? Can you tell us a bit more, Sarah, and tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Sarah Newman. I know a few of you through I'm also the rail officer for the Darren Valley Community Rail Partnership. But as a resident of Shoreham, I've been working with a very small group. We're in the really early stages of trying to get a community energy scheme, more a feasibility study done, because we're not sure it will work. But the proposal is we have to find some land and sink 100 boreholes or more. And it's basically using a ground source energy. And then the second part of it is you then have to drill all around the village and have highly insulated pipes that then go directly to each house that participates. So I know Barkham and Firle and a few other villages are looking at this too. So we're just trying to think, will it work? How many? You need to have a minimum of about 240 houses taking part. And the finances can be quite complicated because it's very expensive. And it ultimately it costs about the same as your normal heating, because you have to pay back the finances somehow. But we're a gas-free village here. We don't have any gas supply. So most houses are using oil, which is a bit of a disaster from a climate point of view. I mean, in our house, we use electric and we have renewable supply, which is another solution, but it's very expensive. So anyway, we're just in the very early stages of exploring it. But if anyone on this group has any experience of this or can offer advice, that would be extremely welcome.
Do you know what, Sarah? I was really hoping someone would talk about community energy schemes. There's some really fascinating resources going on. People are posting in the chat now. Swaffham Village are developing.
We know about
district
Swaffham,
heating.
yeah.
Excellent. There's, I don't know if you've seen, but Patagonia have just launched a big campaign trying to support community energy projects across Europe and the UK.
Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah.
And they've released a film that I'll just called We the Power, which looks at Brixton Energy and I think an energy project in Germany as well. It would be so amazing if we could make something happen in Sevenoaks on community energy. I would personally be excited about Power Up North. I'm going to come to Sophie Marple in a minute because I think she's got lots of ideas. But first, I think Helen Russell, you've been waiting for a little while. Can I ask you to come in and share your reflections and ideas, Helen?
Thanks, John. Actually, Tony Clayton's had his hand up longer than I, so I'm happy if Tony wants to go. He's been terribly patient, but his hand was way earlier.
You go first, Helen.
Tony next.
All right, thank you. And thanks ever so much for inviting the public to participate in this discussion. My name's Helen Russell. I look at social impact of project finance. So I'm often on the part of an environmental team looking at how the projects affect community members and sort of trying to enable their inputs into the decision-making processes. I'm really excited that Sevenoaks is hosting this forum. Really stimulating discussion and great ideas from everybody. And what I'm struggling with in terms of dealing with the climate emergency from a personal basis is the fact that I do a lot personally. So I'll pick up litter on walks, I'll sort of be water efficient. So I've got water butts in the garden, I've got bee-friendly garden planting, you know, I sort of try and I buy from a local farmer's market, I sort of refill my bottles at sort of localized stalls where I can do that. So I do a lot, kind of as much as I can, and it feels horribly ineffectual. And actually what I'd really like to know is that my energy providers are actually contributing net positively to the environment. And that is an area that I really feel that I'd have the most significant impact as an individual. So I wondered actually I'm excited to hear about the Shoreham sort of community energy scheme. But that would be sort of where I'd advise the council to think about really facilitating that opportunity for local community members, because there's definitely the appetite. Obviously, it's going to have to be a mix of funding in terms of resources, because not everyone can afford to put in this infrastructure that's required. So that was my only sort of question or plea to the council, is sort of, you know, where we can identify those environmentally friendly energy producers. They're the ones that should be championed and supported, and maybe consumers incentivized to use. And, you know, the more local they are, the better in my head. But that was all I wanted to add to the discussion.
No, thank you. And I think that sense of like, we're trying to do all you can as an individual and finding the limits of that. This is why I was so keen and so excited to have Rob join us, and that spirit of like, actually, like, we can do so much as individuals, but it's going to be too little. And if we just wait for government, but I think what you're saying, what you're speaking to, the kind of, if things like what Sarah's talking about in Shoreham, if we could build up some work around that, and then if the council can come behind it, Marilyn, who's the town mayor, is saying there's an electricity from waste happening in Greatness Quarry. If we could sort of make these more visible and make more of these, I'm sure this feels like a really interesting area, and one we'll definitely come back to in the aftermath of this meeting and find out more about. Tony, you have been waiting forever, my good man. What would you like to add to proceedings?
I just want to just draw attention to the fact that we're quite lucky in Sevenoaks that we've got people who live here who are involved in some of the big things. Like, well, I know he's not going to talk about it, but there is somebody on this call who is in charge of decarbonising one of Europe's largest energy companies. So we have people here in Sevenoaks who could do this sort of stuff. We have, you know, we can tap the macro and deal with the micro. We can do both. But I think in terms of things that, when I really love the stuff that Otto's is doing. I think, you know, demolishing the
coffee cup mountain is one of the biggest things you could do to reduce local council costs, actually. But the things that we can do here, it really ought not to be too hard to do the stuff that Rob Hopkins was talking about to green the town. I mean, it ought not to be hard to convince people who live in a place named after trees that greening the town is a really good, fundamentally, our thing to do. The thing we have got to do, and I think Elizabeth referred to it earlier, the district council in particular has not done anything to promote active travel, to promote cycling, walking, to help kids get to school without endangering themselves in traffic. And it's partly because our district council has invested a huge amount of its surplus cash in car parks to raise money. And if you do that, you've stuck yourself on a drug that you can't get off. There is actually a big problem to fix that. The thing that is the huge opportunity for Sevenoaks, I mean, I'm in my other life, as well as being a councillor, I'm chairman of the Sevenoaks Rail Travellers Association. So that means I'm really chairman of the Sevenoaks Home Workers Association at the moment, because people are not travelling to London. There is a huge revolution in the way we are going to live here, which is that we are not going to spend most of our time on the train. And this idea of working closer to home, living closer to home, living within your community, spending your money in your community, the 10-minute town where you actually want stuff to conduct your daily life, which is in 10 minutes walk or cycle of where you live, should of itself give us the chance to make a really big green revolution, to stop spending money on travelling and start living in our communities and making them more livable and making them greener. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Tony. I know we do have, I think, Doug Ellish from the Sevenoaks Bicycle User Group. Doug, are you in the room? Because it feels like picking up on this sustainable transport, active travel point might be good. What are your thoughts on what we could be doing if you're able to chip in? Yeah, sure. Yes, as John has mentioned, I'm from the Sevenoaks Bicycle Users Group, and the name is a slight misnomer, because we're really looking at active travel and promoting active travel, including cycling and obviously walking and other means of non-motorized travel, whatever that may be. I think Tony has really summarized the situation that we have, and what I really would do is urge you to ask anyone in authority, be it at the district council level, or especially at the district council level, at the town council level, at the county level, to make sure that we have put in place what's known as the LC WIP, which is the local cycle and walking infrastructure plan. And without getting too technical, because that's beyond me anyway, essentially government has asked local authorities and set out guidelines and asked them to do this, and is making funding available to do it as well. And it's really important for the local authorities to get involved with the local people and come up with these plans to promote active travel, develop cycle routes where they can be developed, looking at ways of getting kids to school without being taken in a large vehicle, or any vehicle for that matter, looking at the way that people move through the town, looking at connectivity, etc. And I know that there is some move afoot in this direction already, but we here in Sevenoaks, I'm afraid to say, are starting very much at the back of the race, and we really need to move ourselves forward very quickly. So, as I said, my ask of everyone this evening is please push for this, because if we don't get it, we won't get access to central government money. There's a very decent sized pot out there, but if you're not ready to compete for it or tender for it, you're just not in the race whatsoever.
So that's what we have to do. That's the starting point. And obviously people have been talking about a lot of really good stuff today, and some of their ideas are terrific about maybe we have a car-free day once a week. It'd be brilliant. I think it would be absolutely fantastic. But as part of that, we definitely need to get this in place in order to get government funding to promote active travel in our town and in our district.
Could you just repeat the name of that document, the local?
Yeah, certainly. It's the LC WIP, which is the local cycle and walking infrastructure plan.
Thank you so much, Doug. Really sort of clear thing we need to do where local authority and community meet, and I think that gives us a really concrete thing to work with. That's great. I'm going to come to someone who I know has been sort of posting ideas and energy in the chat throughout, but isn't from Sevenoaks, and hear your story, because it's a friend of mine, Sophie Marple, who's been doing some really interesting stuff, and I think might be able to stimulate us a little bit more. Sophie, do you want to come in?
Oh, thanks, John. It's been amazing to listen to you all. I mean, Sevenoaks just sounds fantastic that you're all so engaged. I'm a mum of two, and I live in North London, and I feel a bit I was a bit late to the climate debate. I suddenly realised sort of a few years ago, just pre the Extinction Rebellion, that the climate crisis really was a crisis, and I felt that actually if I was a mum, and I realised suddenly that kind of the safety of the future of my children and the chance of having a sort of vibrant future was being quite threatened. And it was a shock. It was a real shock, and I started thinking, oh, what am I going to do? And I started working together with some other mums in my local area and thinking, what can we do to get more mothers engaged? I think that mothers are an incredibly strong voice, but often they're missed voice. You don't hear them in the debate enough, mainly because we're busy, we're at play dates, with clubs, all this sort of stuff. And so we thought, well, how can we get mothers more engaged? And so we came together with this thought of, if you're really going to do something about the climate crisis, everything needs to change. So everyone must be engaged. So therefore, how do you actually engage everyone? So we came together, we thought about what we might be able to do, and we created an organisation called the Mothers Climate Action Network, otherwise known as Mothers Can. And we try and engage mothers who maybe have just woken up to the climate crisis and want to do something, and they want to take action, but they don't really know how to do it. And we encourage them to start a conversation with their peer group, start a conversation with their friends in their network about climate and about what they feel about it, and maybe get a group together. And then we help and facilitate facilitate a kind of group chat, and kind of encourage the group to go through from wanting to take action to actually taking action. So we have 4 or 5 groups now running across the UK. We're really keen to get more groups to start in new areas. We don't have a group in Sevenoaks, so if there is somebody who is here, or more than one person who is thinking, actually, yeah, I would like to lead a group in my local area, I want to bring some friends together, have this conversation, please do get in touch. I'm going to put my email in the chat, actually, and just drop me an email, and I will also put the website in the chat too. And it would be great to hear from anyone if you want to know more about it.
Thank you so much, Sophie. Great contribution. I'm going to ask Simon Featherstone, waiting with his hand up for a little while. Simon, where would you like to take the conversation? What would you like to contribute?
Hello, good evening, everyone. So I'm a keen cyclist, but not in a clap myself in lycra and race 50 miles. I love the what if questions, and I love a lot of the big thinking here. But I'd like to imagine a world where, when you say you cycle to work, people don't look at you a bit strangely, and if you say my children cycle to school, they don't look at you as if you're an abusive parent. So getting to the point where, and we all know, because the roads are dangerous and we don't have adequate cycling provision. So building on some of the things that have been covered earlier and what Doug said and Tony said, I suppose where I'm coming from is just to appeal to everyone to demand more of our politicians, of everyone around us, to say, look, I want an alternative to driving my children to school. I want an alternative to going to work or cycling to the station and getting on the train to London. I want to be able to do these things. So one of the things that we're trying to do, and it's a very sort of small pedestrian thing when I listen to some of the wonderful big ideas we've got on here, is looking at, we formed an organisation called Stocks, Sevenoaks to Otford Cycle Scheme, and we're pushing for action on that. But I suppose what I wanted to do in this forum is just, number one, encourage people to say, what can I do to put pressure on political organisations and the community as at large to encourage cycling and to make it more normal? The second thing is, if you have routes that are important to you, get out there and campaign for them, form a group and start looking at it, because the more of these we get, the more we can join up. And when we join these paths up, they become just a lot more usable for everyone. So that's really all I wanted to say. And thank you to everyone for listening.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Simon. If there's a link to Stocks or where people can join up or kind of be on your mailing list, then please do post some instructions in the chat, and we'll circulate, we'll pick the bones out of this astonishing chat sequence and try and send them around later. But please,
I'll post an email link where people can contact us. So yeah, thank you for that. Thanks very much.
Superhero, thank you. And is that part of this? Is that linked up with Doug's work in the Sevenoaks Bicycle User Group as well?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, Doug's part of the crew working on that. So yeah,
excellent.
S-Bug support.
Great, thank you so much. The other person waiting patiently with their hand up is Marilyn. Marilyn, what would you like to contribute?
I'd like to ask people how they would like us to try and communicate some of these ideas, because one of the problems in Sevenoaks is that we do have, as Tony said earlier, some very experienced people in the fields we're concerned about. We also have some good ideas, like the methane from the last waste site in Sevenoaks is generating electricity and will be doing so for some years, which is used locally at Great Nest Quarry. There are community orchards. There's one starting in the allotment. There's one at Shoreham. There's another one being, I put out a plea for more trees to celebrate the life of the Duke of Edinburgh. And I've had people coming to me with ideas for more community orchards in the area. So where we've got these happening, we don't talk about them. We don't tell people that to support them and encourage them. So please, can people find ways that we can communicate better? I don't even know what's going on with the zero carbon group at the district council. Even that's not coming through very well. So
it's really a great challenge, Marilyn. I think this idea that like there's all these ideas, and I mean some of the things we're hearing about tonight that are already happening, and all of the initiatives that the council already we don't even know, and I think seeing what other people are doing actually gives you more energy to do more of it, doesn't it? So
yes, it does.
I think this thing of like, if we can. I mean, one idea that strikes me is whether we could actually, that we might look at afterwards, is whether we can create a map to bring to let people see what's going on everywhere. I think I'm gonna come on. We're running out of time fast, folks. We've already been here an hour, and think about the flood of ideas we've had. I'm going to come to Lucy Stone now, if I can. There's who's just posted something in the chat, so maybe she can talk about that as well as her broader work. Lucy, over to you.
Hi everyone, I'm not in Sevenoaks, I'm in Wiltshire, but I have a connection there. My mother-in-law is from there and she is listening in somewhere. It's amazing to hear everything you're doing. So I would just add two things really. So one is absolutely thinking about what is the most we can do collectively. So rather than just thinking what are the small things we can do, which has been mentioned, what is the most we can do collectively? The renewable district heating project that Sarah described, that's amazing. And that's the kind of project where you can have a really meaningful impact at scale. And you can start to really feel like you're making progress. The other thing I'd say is, another way of thinking about it is the transition is underway. Okay, it's not happening way fast enough. It's still too slow. We're still not on track to stay within 1.5 degrees, but it is underway. It's going to happen. And if we want to make sure how that looks in Sevenoaks is something you're happy with, you have to get involved. You have to get involved in how that's going to look in your community. And that's a chance to rethink things. We had a tantalizing window last year, didn't we, of seeing what the roads looked like without wall-to-wall cars. We had a little glimpse of what it could be like. And so it's really, really important that we really play a role at a community level to really shape that transition so that it is fair. It's how we want to see it, and it creates communities that we want to see in the future. So I'd say that. And then in terms of other things that could be done in Sevenoaks that haven't already been mentioned, in my community, in the village where I live, we've been looking at how we can decarbonize some of the schools and some of the buildings also from on a heating level. We've already installed solar panels and we're looking at heat pumps. Even just providing information on heat pumps, a lot of people still don't even know about the technology. They don't know that it's viable and that it's an option. Some people are able to do that privately, and then where you can't do that, you exactly need a project, the one that Sarah described, where you can come together and you can do that collectively. And the other projects, there are amazing stories of flood prevention. There's a website, Carbon Copy, that has a lot of these stories, as well as Transition Towns, Rob's initiative. There are amazing stories of flood prevention schemes where communities have come together and have created leaky dams, which are far more effective than the very expensive, often big concrete barrier block schemes for flood prevention, and have biodiversity and nature benefits as well. And then also plastic-free schemes. So plastic-free groceries just opened up in our village, and it's become an amazing hub for also a plastic-free, no coffee cup, disposable coffee cup in the same way as your coffee shop. And it's become a bit of a hub for a bit like the Camden hub that Rob mentioned. It's become a bit of a hub for finding out what else is happening in the community on climate change. So those are the other things I'd add. And there are lots of resources and places you can go for information. Sarah, I'm happy to connect you with organisations that are helping on the sort of feasibility and financing side of community energy projects. And I'll leave it at there. Hope that helps.
Thank you so much, and I didn't introduce Lucy properly, but I came across, as we're preparing for this event, this amazing report on community-led climate action that was published by a big leading think tank called the IPPR, and when I looked through the names that had written it, Lucy stood out and I'd recognised her from something else, so I got in touch, but I posted the link to that report in the chat and we'll send it around. There's some real inspiration there as well. I'm gonna, Elwyn Jones is, I hope I pronounced your name right, my friend. If you could unmute yourself and give your chip into things. And then I've got a couple of other folk lined up to close us out, because we are gonna finish on time, despite the fact that it feels like this is a conversation that probably needs to happen again. So we might come back to that as well. But Elwyn, what have you got to say for yourself?
Yeah, okay, I hope I haven't been rude posting a lot of my ideas on the chat, but at least they're there for you to download if you want to see them.
That's what the chat is for.
There's one of them I'd like to bring to particular attention. I had a problem with a street light shining straight through my bedroom window and ruining my sleep. So I eventually traced it and I was able to contact KCC. And they've actually got a remote system. As you know, they've replaced all our street lights with LED street lights, which are very good. But in spite of that, they're still able to reduce it by a further down to 70% lighting that you currently have. 70% of lighting, I think, well, I won't go down that route too far, but it will reduce the power consumption of street lighting quite a lot. And all you have to do is ask KCC to reduce the light level in your street. They've got it all set up to do it, except they haven't actually done it for me. So I think a lot of us will have to complain to get them to actually do it, but they've got the infrastructure there to do it.
That's great. Thank you, Owen. Really specific, concrete thing that we can pick up and take on. I'm going to come, if I may. Is Julian Critchlow in the room? I'd love to. Julian, who lives in Ide Hill, has been working for the government and working for Bain until recently. Julian, if you could share your thoughts, and I'd love to hear your reflections on the conversation and where you think we should go from here. You've been working in this world for a fair while.
Yes, I feel somewhat accountable for this. Just for context, I was the Director General until the end of March for a very long title, but effectively for net zero. So driving the central government plans to deliver net zero. And I love the conversation. A huge amount of energy, a huge amount of great ideas, and it's exactly that this kind of community action that actually is going to be required, as the Committee on Climate Change put in their report. A lot of the actions need to be taken by individuals, obviously facilitated by local government and central government, but it's going to require a lot of individual action. So the one thing I probably would say is that from an energy systems point of view, there are a lot of the comments in the chat about the energy system. That is on a fairly good path towards zero emissions for the electricity that you use. And that should be achieved in, if you read the Energy White Paper, it should be achieved relatively soon. We're already obviously over 50% renewables and low carbon generation, and on a very strong pathway to get that to 100%. The key though is obviously moving all of our energy use across, and obviously the largest part of that a lot of people talked about was the transport system. So everything we can do on integrating our transport system locally, bringing in low carbon buses, obviously will make a difference, but obviously ultimately a lot of the transport is done individually, and therefore it is about moving to EVs, which obviously requires a lot of local enablement for us to make that feasible for everybody who doesn't have off-street parking. But probably the key thing I'd say from a personal point of view, coming into this space 3 years ago, from having spent a career in energy in the business world, was the challenge that my wife actually set for me coming into government, which was to say, what is your own personal carbon footprint? Because if you're going to prioritize the actions that we take, we ought to be able to answer that question. And so it was the question I used to ask all of my teams when they used to come and see me is, what is your personal carbon footprint? The average is 6 or 7 tons for each citizen in the UK. And obviously that, looking at how that's made up and on what individual action we can take and what action as a communities we can take on the largest items will have the most impact fastest. So certainly government is very ambitious. It's not ambitious. People would say it's not ambitious enough. You can always be more ambitious, but it's definitely seeing this as a huge opportunity for the economy, as well as creating new and creative jobs, as well as getting the carbon down. So as you will have hopefully seen yesterday, was announced that the Carbon Budget 6 will actually bring forward the target we used to have for 2050 to 2035. So it's it is an accelerating path, but it does require a lot of individual action. From my own point of view, we as a household have moved to try to take action on a lot of the priority items. So we are an EV household. We have the benefit of being able to be that. Obviously we do. My children have, and my wife has convinced me we are vegetarian. So there's another opportunity to reduce your carbon footprint. Obviously, all the action we can take on heating, we've moved over to renewable heat, because again, we're similar to one of the earlier speakers. We're not on the gas grid, so we're in a fossil fuel oil area. So we've moved over to heat pumps. So all of these decisions, and obviously a lot of what government is trying to do centrally is to try and enable those, but it's going to take local action to actually make them happen.
Julian, just to finish up, you were mentioning when you contacted me the other day about local climate action plans at the level of the local authority, and you see that as a sort of pretty key thing to be asking for. And
yeah,
I was mentioning earlier that the walking implementation, the cycling walking implementation plan, the local climate action plan, I understand is something that you see as pretty critical.
Yeah, this is going to be something I think that's going to be a lot more attention in the coming years, and so this is an opportunity for Sevenoaks really to push hard on, because the I mean I was at the Public Accounts Committee, and the Select Committee put a lot of attention on the local plans and asking central government how we're coordinating the actions at the centre with the actions locally. And the reality is, in the past, a lot of the initiatives have been in the central power generation system, the moving over to renewables, etc. So it hasn't required as much local action. But now we're moving into this phase where if you want people to move on to EVs, 96% of journeys are within 25 miles. You don't actually need fast charging infrastructure. You need local charging infrastructure. So you need to have that parking in every parking space, which for people who don't have off-street parking, they have to have that ability to charge. Similarly, integrating, as you say, with cycles and buses and trains, if we can get more people onto low carbon public transport, then again, so these kind of integrated local plans, it's a lot about planning. It's a lot about taking action in a coordinated fashion to make it easy for people to make the transition.
Thanks so much, Julian. I think like bringing that focus, it's not about saying like it's either the government or us, or there's things only we can do or whatever. It's all of it, isn't it? It's sort of the energy building and how we can make this happen as a community. I'm going to we're come to the end of our time together, and I wanted to finish off with a bit of that push. I think the spirit of this evening has been all about communities and what we can do, and collectively, not just individually, but also as individuals. It's not one or the other. Individuals, communities, councils, but it would be remiss of me not to finish the event by sort of coming back to where we're at in this moment in time. There are county council elections coming up across Sevenoaks district, and one of the things we've been doing as the Liberal Democrats, we've been working actually and talking a lot with the local Green Party. And I think Laura Manston, who's the Green Party candidate in Sevenoaks Rural North East, who we've actually sort of come quite close to and we've stepped aside for. And but the only I'd like to say the only place in Sevenoaks that you should vote for anyone other than a Liberal Democrat in the coming county council elections is Sevenoaks Rural North East. But it's Laura there, because I know you've got a couple of ideas and wanted to share one or two things just before we finish, and then we'll close off.
Hi, John. Thank you for that. Yeah, I'm Laura Manston. I'm Green Party candidate for Sevenoaks Rural North East. So very honoured to be invited to this Lib Dem meeting. It's been fantastic listening to everybody. I live in New Ash Green in Sevenoaks, and like I said, I'm standing in the election for Sevenoaks Rural North East. At the beginning of the evening, John read a quote that I found really struck me quite a lot about how government change will probably not be quick enough for what we need to address the climate emergency, and how individual change will not be big enough. And hopefully community change will be just enough. And I really like that quote, and I agree with it completely. I think the key thing for me is that it doesn't exonerate the government, the place that the government have to play in this. So what I wanted to just end this evening on was to talk to you about how local government can affect the climate emergency and help us tackle it. My cats are joining in, even they agree. So in 2019, UK Parliament declared a climate emergency. And shortly after, Kent County Council declared a climate emergency as well. That motion was brought by Green Party councillor Martin Wybrow. As of February this year, 300 of the 404 local councils in the UK had declared a climate emergency. In Kent, there are 13 local councils, and 9 of those had declared a climate emergency. So just 4 local councils in Kent had not declared a climate emergency, and one of those is Sevenoaks. And this is really disappointing for me because with so much of Sevenoaks in the green belt and so much passion locally, as we've heard tonight, it really baffles me as to why we're not one of those councils which is committed to working on this problem. Sevenoaks Council does, someone mentioned earlier that it does have a net zero carbon policy, but that only applies to the business of the council, not the district as a whole. So that can be somewhat misleading, something to bear in mind. But I think if we want the council to take our ideas and suggestions as a community seriously and to support us to achieve them, we really need them to commit to the same ultimate goal as us. So I and the Sevenoaks Green Party have set up a petition to call on Sevenoaks Council to declare a climate emergency. And I think we need them to do that so that we can rely on their commitment. So I'd really like to ask you all to sign that petition, please. I'll put a link in the chat. It's a change.org petition. And if I'm elected to the council in May, then one of the first things I'd like to do is to try and push that motion through and get Sevenoaks to declare a climate emergency so that we can all be working towards the same goal. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. And as a very last one, we have to have the last word ourselves a little bit. So Richard Stratfield, who's the county council candidate for Sevenoaks Town, over to you. Finish us off.
Thanks very much. I'm going to be brief. 3 points. First of all, picking up on what Laura said, what if everybody believed there was a climate crisis? And what if everybody believed that carbon net zero was the way to solve it? So I think there's a huge role for education across the board in solving it. Secondly, time is ticking over my shoulder. The clock goes on. Every day we don't take action is a day we need to take more severe action. Later on in Sevenoaks in 2015, we had 13 days of smog down at Greatness Park. In 2020, we had 34. At the moment, that situation is going in the wrong direction and will require even greater action as we go on. And I think the point has been well made that action needs to happen at an individual level, at a community level, and at government and structural level. All levels of government need to take that action. Lastly, I'd just pick up on something that Rob said. I love a win-win-win-win-win-win situation. So I think we should end by thanking Rob and Elizabeth and John for hosting, and I thank you all very much for coming in the spirit that it was intended, that we come out of it with a series of ideas that we can go take away and look at as potential future politicians to enhance the prospect of a healthier, happier community, and one that isn't going to face the worst excesses of what is in an absolute certain climate crisis that will come if we don't take any action. Thank you all very much.
So thank you, Richard. Final word from me, folks. There's lots of work to do. This is just the beginning of a conversation. We'll be emailing out, and we've got a lot of work to do to digest these ideas. One thing that would really help us is if there are things you're particularly passionate about, push them into the tank we've created. I mentioned this at the beginning, and you get more detail in the email. This is it, just to share it with you. What would do most to reduce our carbon emissions across Sevenoaks to net zero by 2030? Choose as many times as you like, or add your own ideas. This website will serve you. Will show up two different ideas, and you pick the thing you think will be most effective each time. So door-to-door energy retrofit, like Better Buildings program in Michigan, was something that someone suggested before this event. If I click that, I get served 2 more options. You can click I can't decide, or you can add your own idea. You can see the results and see what's been prioritized. This is a part of how we'll be going through the chat and understand and putting ideas into there, but it's through your votes and your contributions that we'll be able to understand like what the most important things are and what we can put most energy behind. We'll be sharing, we'll come back out with all the contact details, all the suggestions, and where we can help to connect people and make stuff happen, we'll do a lot more. Claire Shea's posting in the chat, could we do this again? It could be a great, this group coming together again could be a great basis for a cross-party town action forum. I think that sounds a wonderful idea. So we'll come back out with all of those suggestions, and we will look to do something similar again. And we'll look for your feedback. So if you have ideas, please come to us and let us know. We wanted to open this conversation, and we're going to follow it wherever we have to. So thank you so much for coming. That's enough of all of us. We're 6 minutes over, which I promised we wouldn't be, and I apologize, but enjoy the rest of your evenings. Thank you very much for coming.
In the recording, John.
Yeah. Thanks, John. I'll close the meeting.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, folks. I'll close the meeting and the recording will end automatically. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Goodbye.
John.
Thank you.